and he's responsible for design, development, product management, product strategy, and corporate communications. So he's kind of master of all over there at One Access, by the way. Pravin's is a true international passenger. I mean, he comes from Irish Indian lineage, and his wife is from Slovenia, and he's worked in like 5 different countries. And he says, I said, what do you do after work? He says he loves to read. And he's going to share with us some spy thrillers here on the stage. His favorite author is Stella Remington, and you can talk to him about his spy thrillers and spy novels offline. But here today, he's going to talk to you about the full potential of SDN NFV in the enterprise battleground. Pravin?
Thank you. So, still good morning. Good morning, everybody. Well, obviously the introductions have been done. So what I'm going to look at today is the CPE. Very much focused on the customer premises. What's going to happen there? Are we going to move to a dumb switch? I remember talking to one of the larger service providers in North America telling me that his dream was that CPE would turn into an RJ45 socket. No equipment, nothing. But then he said the problem is legacy. And that's one of the key themes that I'm going to address during my presentation today. So, one perspective that I think is interesting to look at is how are the vendors approaching this? You've heard many of them talk during the course of the last 1.5 days, and there are more to come. And specifically the equipment vendors. And if you look at the equipment vendors that typically today provide transport or layer 2 type equipment, essentially they're saying, let's do embedded or onboard NFVI. So they're equipping their equipment with x86 compute capability. They're building an NFVI inside the equipment, and just as my colleague from ADVA just said, this gives you the flexibility to deploy VNFs around the network, be it in the core, be it at the edge or elsewhere. The vendor challenge for people like ADVA and others is well, where do those functions come from? And all of those equipment vendors, including ourselves, are busy building ecosystems to show that hosting capability on that transport equipment. The layer 3 vendors have a slightly different approach because typically they're building the network functions. They've been resident in dedicated CPE that's on the premises, and their challenge is how to take that out and make it available as software only, disassociated from the hardware platform. But there are some use cases where even if it all becomes a software world, where there may be a need for x86 compute capability and onboard NFVI actually at the customer premise. And then a number of vendors that's often the same as the layer 2 vendors who are providing PE equipment or aggregation equipment at the network edge, and really looking to add that compute capability there in order to facilitate a fully distributed NFV model. Let's take a look at the nature of the vendors and how they approach it. So, no excuses to mention that Cisco is one of the giants, but there are many others here in this room. And essentially, the strategy here is that they master a number of different technologies. They have various types of equipment that can be positioned around the network, and they can put the full end-to-end story together so that if you engage with one of the larger vendors, that the complexity of building this new architecture of NFV or SDN can be shifted, if you like, onto their responsibility. Obviously, some of the operators would have some questions about that, but the challenge, I think, for some of the larger vendors is how to make sure that the equipment is relevant, as well as some of the software components going forward. For the layer 2 guys, as I said, their key challenge is, because they're essentially building the infrastructure, the transport networks for the networks, adapting, if you like, to the shape and design of the operator networks, is how to build the ecosystem to host those functions. And the layer 3 CPI guys, is, as I said, taking those sources out, taking that software out of the monolithic architecture that used to exist, and making it available and placing it into the network wherever the operator should desire. And of course, the key challenge here, because they're not providing often the full end-to-end solution, is to make sure that interoperability and openness are adhered to in order to allow that network function to be transitioned. So let's take a look at legacy. One of the things that I've observed amongst my travels when talking about NFV is that by and large, NFV is an ILEC game. The historic operator, to use the French term, these are the people that are really mostly engaged. It doesn't mean that there aren't larger tier 2 or CLEC vendors engaged in this process, but most of the activity, most of the real engagement, most of the trials in the industry are associated with the large ILECs. And typically the large ILECs have a lot of legacy to deal with. There is TDN interfaces out there. There are often serial interfaces for specific purposes. They're on their own journey in terms of voice over IP migration. So one of the key issues that they face is how to deploy this new programmatic NFV model to get the benefits that they so desire, and yet cope with all of the legacy stuff that is out there on their networks. And clearly, they have the capability of moving some network services into the core or to the edge, and maybe some will have to be left on the premises, particularly when there is legacy to deal with. Quite a lot of the POCs and trials that are running around the world today have an unspoken assumption. And that unspoken assumption is that it's greenfield. There's no legacy to deal with. So what this means is the NFVI infrastructure is built in a lab, on a piece of equipment. Maybe it's a white box. And services are put into that. So specific VNF components are taken and run on those NFVIs. But in a sense, it's ignoring the problem of legacy. And this need, if you like, to separate the legacy and virtualize certain services and how you approach it is really a big conundrum, particularly for those ILECs. So as a result, we see a number of different potential CPE deployment models. I have to say, this slide got a little bit lost a little bit in the move from my office to here. So there should be an open flow switch in the bottom left-hand corner. But really what I wanted to focus on was the three boxes that you see here. That in order to cope with legacy, the traditional CPE that you find on-premise today will be a mix of different things. Clearly, it's a processing platform that provides either layer 2 or layer 3 services, particularly if it's a router. It will have a number of specialized interfaces to deal with legacy services, those TDM, for voice, so to be able to integrate BRI or PRI or T1, E1, there may be some specialized serial interfaces on that box. But the thing is, that box won't go away overnight. It still has to be amortized over time. But more particularly, those legacy services won't disappear overnight. So there will be a role, I think, for the traditional CPE going forward in many, many service deployments over the next few years. Another one at the bottom right here on this chart will be to take the white box approach, which is, okay, let's put the x86 compute platform in there, let's put the NFVI onto that, and then let's consolidate the various appliances that are on premise. And here we can get a lot of the programmatic and automation capabilities of NFV, but also the CapEx savings that are associated with that. And it may be that that will be an approach for some operators, that where they have legacy, they'll use a sort of more traditional CPE, they'll put a white box next to it, and consolidate functions that way. Another approach would be to build sort of hybrid CPE. So CPE that combines the two capabilities, this ability to take in the legacy functions, as well as host an NFVI and the associated functions on it. So I've called this a sort of hybrid NFVI PCPE. I think the key message here is legacy is not going to go away overnight. The ILECs really have to deal with it. They have many, many customers that depend on those legacy services. And particularly here in Europe, one of the key issues is ISDN migration. ISDN has for many years been a cash cow. I know that in France and most of Southern Europe, we're more or less at the end of the journey of phasing it out. But I know in certain other countries, Germany and UK spring to mind, where that journey is only just beginning because ISDN has represented such a significant, or continues to be such a significant revenue contributor to the operators there. So on the left here, we have the traditional monolithic architecture. We saw the stone in one of the previous presentations. That's what that thing is. So basically, it's an architecture either built on switches or on CPU. There's a real-time operating system in there. And on that, there will be the vendor-specific operating system hosting the various functions that a traditional CP will provide. Moving forward, we can imagine various different models. So and here I'm really showing the hybrid NFVI PCP approach, where inside the CPE, the split between the control and the data plane has occurred. Yeah, so the control functions running typically on a Linux environment are there and ready to be addressed by the orchestration system, the VNF manager, and so forth. They could potentially, the middle bit on the right-hand side is an option, there could potentially be an NFVI actually embedded inside the CPE. Yeah? And then the various data functions will be scheduled, optimized for the right I/O, which was another theme that came up in one of the earlier presentations today. So various different choices. It could well be in the service providers that some of these approaches will be combined. But the various CPE deployment models will continue to exist. Now, one of the questions that I often get asked, and I'm sure many of you have been asked, is what goes where? And the answer is, it depends. Yeah? I think one of the key things is the architecture, the network architecture that is actually inside the operators. That will shape where traffic will go. We need to avoid tromboning. We need to deploy as much as possible intelligence to the edge. And in some cases, we need to deploy some of that intelligence and let it remain on the customer prem. I think there'll be a different approach. It may be that for certain customers, certain functions will remain on the prem. For other customers, particularly the SMEs, a lot of those functions will be migrated to the network edge. But each operator will take a different viewpoint. And I know this for a fact, that whenever I've gone and talked to many, many customers, they all have quite different architectures. The ETSI model is the conceptual model, but the actual implementation that they're thinking of and experimenting with really radically differs from operator to operator. But one of the points I wanted to make, and I hope I've made this sufficiently sufficiently clear is there's a lot that still needs to reside actually on the customer prem, particularly when there are legacy services to deal with. There's also another type of network function which requires coordination between the customer prem and the network edge or the core where the server part of that function resides. These are what I call dual-headed, or another term is book-ended functions. So these are functions where you need to do things at both ends of the link. VPN is the classic. You encrypt at one end, you decrypt at the other, and vice versa. There are other functions that have the same characteristics. Things like WAN optimization. You compress, decompress. You accelerate a particular protocol. You do that at both ends of the equation. Or if you're looking for data redundancy elimination, you're building dictionaries at both ends, and there needs to be cooperation. So if you're looking at providing those functions, those end-to-end dual-headed functions, then you need to have a cooperation where typically the client part will be a pure VNF, if you like, resident at the network edge or in the core, and that there will be a component, possibly also a VNF, but maybe embedded in a more traditional manner in the CPE going forward. One of the things that strikes me, I'm responsible for product strategy at my company. One of the things that strikes me is the amount of intelligence that we're being asked to put into the physical CPE. And in particular, this relates to business continuity, service continuity, and associated link management schemes to make sure that that happens. And if you want that intelligence to make sure that if a line goes down, another line comes in, or if you want to bond those lines, or if you want to use various policy-based offload schemes, again, you need some intelligence that might still reside in that CPE. I think the key message here is, yes, a lot will move to the network edge or to the core, but do remember that legacy, and do remember some of this link management stuff that will remain in the customer prem. So, as a parting thought, here are some considerations that I see when I embark on my travels around the world, that you really need to understand the NFV approach of the vendor. We each have, specific interests that we're trying to preserve. Each of us is trying to provide a differentiated approach based on value for our customer set. But understand that and make sure that, it's relevant to what you're trying to achieve as an operator. Clearly, we had some discussions about OpenStack. It's not been abandoned. NetConf, OpenFlow, the various APIs that could be used. Understand also the situation for yourself as an operator in terms of your ability to migrate your OSS. You have spent years and millions building your current OSS systems. They need to be migrated as well. Is that something that can happen overnight? Or is there more of a phased approach? And if there is a phased approach, is that by region, is that by customer set, or is that by service? Understand the management framework that's being put into the equipment. Is it a Yang database model? Is it another model that's being implemented? And one of the key questions that's coming into my department at the moment is, well, how scalable is this? How many VNFs can I run? Are you going to do the VNF management thing? What's the footprint? What's the memory requirement? How many routes can you support? All of these questions are coming in, and not least, how much is it going to cost? As people try to build their business plans. And then understand the deployment architecture. Can you centralize everything? Probably not. How distributed is it going to be? Depends on the shape of your architecture. Depends, to a large extent, on the profile of the customers that you're addressing. Understand the link management schemes. Business continuity is a big, big issue. If everything is in the cloud, and the cloud is no longer accessible, then you still have to get there via other means. And how will that be addressed in order to deliver business continuity? Understand where you're going to put the functions. Are they going to be in pods distributed around your network? Is it going to be hosted on the aggregation equipment or the P equipment? or on specific, as I said, NFVI farms or pods, and to what extent is it in the premises. And then also understand your approach as an operator to the legacy requirements of your customer set and indeed your own marketing departments who want to preserve some of that ISDN or T1 revenue, which continues to generate significant contributions to the company. There are lots of different use cases. There are lots of different architectures. One thing that I've found when talking and engaging with operators is the huge diversity and variety in approach. Everybody's got a different way of doing it, different vendors, different management systems, different approaches to actually where they're going to distribute the functions inside the network. And don't forget, there are other functions that may need to be integrated. We tend to focus very much as a community on network functions, but as a parting thought, one of the key things that is happening in the industry is this merging of the cloud approach and the telecoms approach. And will that also have an impact on your services? I think that's pretty much what I wanted to say. Thank you very much. I hope there's time for questions.
Thank you, Pravin. Any questions for Pravin? Perhaps we can take one, two. No? Thanks a lot. Well, actually, that's a great transition from Pravin's presentation into Elisa and Paulo, because they're going to talk about the POC and a trial.
Okay, good.
Perfect.
Look forward to that.
So